Welcome,
Hey,
everybody.
everyone.
Welcome to DnDTime Talks, where we discuss all things Dungeons and Dragons. I am Pete.
And I'm Jeremy. I just screwed up my webcam. Now it's in the right spot.
That's all right. Jeremy, that's a nice blue shirt. It's very bright. I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. How are y'all
That's it.
doing
That's all
today,
I
chat?
got. I see
I
we
think I
got
forgot to post the announcement this morning that we'd be having talks today. So,
yes.
oopsies.
Whoops. I mean, we'll do the best we can. But I see we got Zero G Ninja. Hello. We got D Forgotten One. Good evening, Frog, and Sheba. Jeremy sounds sad. Are you?
No.
I mean,
Pete,
I guess
Pete,
we're
Pete,
both.
Pete. I owe sons sad. It's different.
Osins?
I
Jeremy
owe
Osins, sad. So when you Osined, you do it in a very sad way. Why is that, Jeremy?
Well, Pete, I'd talk about it, but it's incredibly inappropriate for this stream.
Oh, okay, yeah.
This is a family-friendly stream. I can't
Osins
talk about
is a
Osins.
graphic word. Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
incredibly obscene.
I mean, fair enough.
I'm just tired, Chad. It's all good.
So today's oh yes. I mean, you'll have to tune into our after-hour stream, Pete and Jeremy's DTime, which is on a different streaming service.
Let's not joke about this.
I mean, I think we've joked about it enough that it now exists for real. So today's topic.
No, it doesn't. Wait a minute. All right, today's topic.
We're talking about monsters in 5th edition. It's going to be the beginning of maybe a series. If you like us talking about monsters, we'll maybe continue to do it. Let us know later on what you ended up thinking of what we said here today. But specifically, we're going to be talking about subcategories of monsters. Things like undead, things like aberrations, celestials, demons and devils, and today, monstrosities.
I love monstrosities!
As do I. I think this is both Jeremy and I's favorite subcategory of monsters.
And if it's your favorite, make sure to let us know in the chat. Wow, that was so good. That was so professional of me. Good work, me. And then I scream into my microphone just after.
Well, yeah, every time you do something like.
But yeah, and also if you have something you want us to talk about in the future, hit us up. Let us know on Discord, on Twitter, or just here in the chat. We'll be paying attention and chatting along with y'all the whole time. So, yeah. And without further ado, I think let's dive in. Pete, what are we talking about today? I mean, obviously monstrosities, but like, what specifically about them?
Yeah, so we're going to be going over a whole bunch of stuff about monstrosities. We're going to be talking about kind of subtypes of monstrosities because they're probably, I'm not going to even say one of, I'm going to say that they're the most diverse kind of subcategory of monster in the monster manual. We're going to be talking about kind of how and where and when to throw them into your game. And we're going to be picking out a few of our personal favorite monstrosities to discuss in a bit more depth and to talk about like how we would use those particular monsters as kind of a baseline as well for using some of the other ones. And I see Roger Twy in chat says, monstrosities are kind of fun. Sure, kind of fun. Well, hopefully by the end of this topic, we convey that we feel that monstrosities are very fun.
I'll turn you into an owlbear enthusiast. Don't you worry.
Yes.
Yeah, and of course we're talking about monstrosities because, well, we love them. They're our favorite category of monsters. It's important to have, as a dungeon master, and as a player too, to have a fundamental base understanding of what the different types of monsters you're going to run into in this crazy fantasy game we play. So we're starting with our favorite one. That's about it.
That's it. It's just our personal bias.
And also, they're probably going to be the monster you see the most of, like Pete mentioned. Very diverse, very versatile. So,
yeah. And today's conversation, while it is naturally, because we're going to be talking about monsters, which is the DM's domain, it's going to be targeted mostly towards DMs. But as we always say, understanding how the games work, how the game works, is good for players. And there's always something you can learn, and always just something that's interesting to talk about. Like, talking about your favorite stories about the time that you got eaten by a insert monstrosity here. How about Mimic? I'm sure everyone's gotten at least almost killed by a Mimic before, if not killed completely. I know all of you have at least almost died to a Mimic.
Yeah, and even beyond that, it can be really helpful for players too to inspire characters, especially if you're playing like a ranger or a character that directly interacts with creature types. But it's cool for all sorts of characters. For example, actually, Bionic Sheba in the chat, a great example is character in DnDTime, or his first character rather, Oldman McWizardface, the Monstrologist. The whole character is inspired by like the concept of cataloging these monsters, which is just really cool. But yeah, monsters can inspire all sorts of different things, which is a big part of why I personally love these creatures.
And The Forgotten One asks, is Jeremy Voorhees a monstrosity of a monstrosity? And the answer is yes.
Absolutely not. No, he is an undead monstrosity.
Oh, you're right. Wait, is he? I mean, he's a lot of things. He's a complicated individual.
So, what is a monstrosity? As we kind of mentioned initially, monstrosity is a subcategory of monsters that applies to a huge range of creatures. In 5th edition, all creatures that you're going to fight have a category. Humanoids is a category. Things like goblins or humans or bugbears or any of those kind of deals are humanoids. They're things that look like humans and they walk around on 2 feet and all that good stuff. Monstrosities, generally, in a way, they're kind of a catch-all for creatures that aren't in a different category. But there are 2 main traits / features that really define what a monstrosity is. And it's a little weird saying it like that, but once we start talking about it, I think you'll understand.
Start to get the vibe.
The first concept is monstrosities are not natural creatures. Despite the fact that they're kind of a part of nature, they aren't originally natural. They were either created, they're maybe like some perversion of a natural creature in some way through magic or some sort of otherworldly influence. But monstrosities are inherently not natural things. They didn't evolve like humanoids, for example. They weren't.
I mean, Jeremy, your favorite monster, I think, is one of the best examples of this.
Oh, precisely.
The owlbear is kind of a perfect textbook monstrosity of this vibe. It shows off this particular trait to the maximum, where it's this strange kind of hybrid of a bear and an owl that ends up being far more terrifying than either would be on their own.
I don't know. Owls can be pretty creepy. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, can owlbears? I never thought about the fact that owlbears can probably turn their head 360 degrees.
Oh yeah.
That's the thing that I've never seen anyone like bring up or do. Okay, never mind.
I hate using owlbears because I don't want them to die ever because I love them.
Another good one is that I had listed here was the hippogriff, which is this kind of same concept of a hybrid of 2 things. It's strange. You'd never actually encounter it, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense from an evolutionary standpoint. But they've kind of thrived, which is this half eagle, half horse creature on its hind legs that can fly around, but also still has 4 legs. So these kind of strange things that are just nature that's been twisted a bit. And then. Yeah, the second category. Jeremy, you want to do it?
I was going to say the second thing that really defines monstrosities is they are dangerous. They're like wild animal dangerous, but they're wild animal dangerous when the wild animals hunt you. Like for monstrosities, humanoids, adventurers are their natural prey. They are really generally cool. Yeah, exactly. They're not out to kill you for any necessarily malevolent reason. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them aren't evil, so to speak. They're very neutral. It's just they'll kill you if they see you because they're hungry. And that's really cool. They're absolutely always disposed to violence. And yeah, it's pretty great. One of the things I really like about them is they're the kind of monster that you don't reason with. you run. Unless you have a very kind dungeon master, or if you run into an owlbear in any of my games, in which case you befriend him and love him. Or her.
And I see Roger Twine in chat mentioning there's a not quite D&D monster called the Spider Goat, which is what you'd imagine. I mean, that definitely sounds exactly like a monstrosity. And then the Camel Ninja Spider Moose has been brought up by D Forgotten One, which I think is actually a celestial, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's some sort of angelic being, obviously. But if it weren't an angelic being, it would be a monstrosity. It was a monstrosity before it ascended to God.
Before it became a deity, yeah. So let's talk about what makes monstrosities so great. Or actually, no. Before I get on that, I skipped a whole section I want to talk about, which is
let's talk about the kinds of monstrosities, Pete.
Yeah, what kind of like subcategories of monstrosities are there within it? Because there are, like we said, it's a huge wide array. So let's talk a little bit about those. The first is kind of something that we touched on a little bit in the kind of first statement where Jeremy was talking about things are unnatural, but those are things which are kind of like a natural creature that has been in some way perverted, such as, say, the owlbear, or let's maybe say something like the Rock, which is this absolutely massive, giant flying kind of bright plumage, somewhere in between an eagle and a falcon, but with a wingspan the size of a house. And it probably eats whole horses for meals. That is kind of one of the core things about, one of the core types of monstrosities are these like natural things that have been twisted and contorted in different ways.
And one of the best things about this kind of monstrosity is you can, and we'll talk a little bit more about flexibility of these creatures later on, but when you're putting a creature like that into your world, into your setting, you can completely decide just on the spot how that creature came into being. Like maybe owlbears, right? Natural in the world, were the results of the experiments of mad wizards centuries ago. Having escaped into the wilderness, they have since thrived and now inhabit the land. Like the origin for a lot of these monstrosities is very open-ended, especially these ones that are just warped, deformed things. They can be things that exist rampantly in your world, like owlbears should. Or I said should there. I meant to say could, but I don't. You know, I meant should.
I don't think you meant to say could.
Or maybe it is a like a manticore or something that you decide was created by an evil villain. And speaking of manticores, let's talk about some of the other categories.
Yeah, so the next kind of big bubble are those creatures that have been kind of adopted from different mythologies, from different real kind of world mythologies. And there are a whole bunch of these. There are things like the Kraken, the Medusa. A lot of them are very kind of Roman or Egyptian or just kind of ancient civilization mythologies that we've taken from. There are sphinxes, are considered monstrosities, minotaurs, centaurs, all of these different things that you kind of, when you hear them, you have this certain kind of ping of recognition that, yes, I already know what this is, but it doesn't quite fit into any other particular category, so they've kind of classified these things as monstrosities. And these things are so much fun to fight, which I think we'll also talk about that more later, but I love battling against stuff that I can tell you a classic myth about, to kind of put myself in the place of Hercules singeing the cut off heads of the Hydra, like things like that. I absolutely love that particular category.
Yeah, and that's one of the best things about those is not only are the creatures like known to both you and your players off the bat, right? But there's all this rich historical background from, like, you know, ancient stories and texts that can feed into these from these myths into your adventures that you can pull inspiration from, which is just awesome. Like the Minotaurs and their mazes. But let's move on to the last kind of category, and these are creatures that are very they're uniquely Dungeons and Dragons. I say uniquely. They aren't uniquely. Most of them were stolen from other games and other media. But they're very iconic Dungeons & Dragons monsters that don't seem to fit into other categories. Creatures like this are like the Displacer Beast, which is basically a black panther with a bunch of tentacles that come off of its back that can jump through space. Just teleport and stuff, which is just cool. The Mimic.
Or create illusions, yeah.
Yep. Pete mentioned the Mimic earlier. The Phase Spider is another example. The Doppelganger is a monstrosity. Even though it looks like a human, because it changes shape into Shape Changer, it falls into this monstrosity category. Many Yuan Ti fall under that category. And these are really cool creatures. I really dig them.
Yeah, me too. And I mean, it's just there's so much of the stuff that you just, when you play D&D, like there's something about throwing things like mimics and displacer beasts at your party that just feels so right. Like, and when you're killing a mimic, which kind of, I think this is going to get into some of the talk about why we love monstrosities so much. The great thing about killing a mimic is that your players almost never, and I mean, there's obviously certain situations in which a player's kind of like, or the way the DM has set up the mimics or kind of framed the situation might change that, but they're almost never going to feel bad about the fact that they killed a mimic. It's just, they're very satisfying for players to just tear apart monstrosities. For example, let's say you have some kind of like, let's say you have some huge monstrosity like ramming into the gates of the city. Let's say it's a Hydra, for example. When your players arrive and see that Hydra, they're going to know what to do. They might not know how to go about accomplishing it. They might see the creature and think like, and might think, well, do we run away? Do we fight it? Are we more powerful enough? What's the best way to battle it? Do we have to go up and maybe like get a high ground and shoot at it from a distance? But they're not going to think, oh, maybe we have to negotiate with this Hydra, or maybe this Hydra is kind of, you know, an agent of a larger organization that we need to interrogate after. It's no, we just have to kill the big giant thing that's terrifying the town. And that kind of stuff can be absolutely great from time to time. Just a very straightforward black and white kind of enemy. And I think that's what monstrosities are in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and even more so, those monstrosities, just to further reiterate what Pete was saying, there's no thought of like, oh, but wait, he simply misunderstood, I can redeem him. Because this is a true intelligence creature of instinct most of the time. And then the ones that aren't true intelligence creatures of instinct, the ones that are sentient and, you know, intelligent even, very intelligent, can be incredibly compelling. Because they come from a very neutral perspective often, not really on the good or evil bandwagon, just kind of existing and becoming stronger. It's just really cool, and I really enjoy it. What is interesting, actually, with these is when you do find the player who cares about the monstrosities, when you find that ranger who's like, but the Hydra was living here before the townsfolk built their town here. We can't help the townsfolk. And then there's some fun internal strife going on, right? But anyway, I just think it's really cool. And that kind of ties back to what we were saying earlier, right? Of informed knowledge of these monster types can help you to build interesting and engaging characters. Like Oldman was saying in chat, oh, really? Is that true? Do you not feel bad? And that actually reminds me exactly of one of our oldest and corest players in D&D time, Switch, Adrian P. in Twitch chat. I'm not sure if he's here quite now, but his character, Switch, loves monstrosity. And they play an Oath of Ancients paladin, and really tie that love of nature into this is why they love monstrosities, because monstrosities, although created differently, are now part of the natural cycle. And it's just a really nice take on it that, like, I'd love to see played out longer in a longer form game than D&D time.
Sure.
But even just in D&D time, it's great to see that kind of deal. Anyway, let's talk about the recognizability of monstrosities. One of the things that makes them the most iconic, that's awesome, is even when you're playing with people who have never played Dungeons & Dragons before, and you say, as you turn the corner, you see a Medusa. They know what they see. You don't have to say anything else. They know what the hell a Medusa looks like, and they're immediately terrified that they're going to be turned to stone.
Mhm.
You didn't need to say anything else. There's no knowledge checks. They just know, oh shit. And it's awesome.
Yeah, you get this kind of, as a DM, free emotional reaction out of your players because they understand the threat of your monsters. And I think that's true, especially with the mythological ones, and more so than any monster, except maybe the Beholder, which has almost taken on a mythological quality just from how
Beholder's
popular
not a
it is.
monstrosity.
Well, I'm saying,
Yeah.
I said aside from maybe the Beholder, or maybe a dragon. Other than, I think, those two big ones, any like threatening monster that you put at the players, like say a purple worm, which is also a monstrosity, doesn't quite have the same impact. I mean, you know it's huge, you know it's big and scary, but it doesn't have that inherent, like, I already know what this does and how terrifying it is, like say a Medusa or a Hydra or something that's very recognizable. So you get that kind of free, just, this is something I need to be scared of, out of players, which is very satisfying, and it can create some really compelling moments.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of my favorite scenarios, being a dungeon master for new players, is when they run into their first mimic, or there's a bunch of those like first creatures. First rust monster, which is another monstrosity. It's very classic to D&D. That when they first run into those guys for the first time, it's just, the reaction is excellent. It's abject horror. And it's just amazing, right? The sudden, like, actual visceral fear of, oh my god, this thing is monstrous, basically. For lack of a better term.
Have you ever gotten to really get someone who'd never heard of a mimic before, Jeremy?
No, but I did it with a cube. We'll talk about that one later on, though.
Yeah, we'll do it. I don't know if we can do a whole ooze day, but we can spend some time on oozes.
We could do it. Maybe. Anyway, we'll talk about oozes in passing. We'll group like oozes and plants together.
Yeah, oozes, plants. I'm sure there's another one, maybe beasts.
Oh yeah. But anywho, monstrosities.
Yeah, but we're talking monstrosities. They're extremely versatile. We've kind of touched on this a little bit, but there is a monster for any possible situation that you could find yourself in. The monsters have, like, there's a monster that feels suited to every climate. There are monsters for underground. There are monsters for, there's monsters for everywhere. And you can also kind of find them, and as we're talking about kind of how to put them in your games, we'll go into more detail here, but you can also find ways to very easily force a monster into, that you want to use into just about any situation or any kind of spot in your game. They're just really flexible.
Yeah, exactly. And part of that flexibility that's so awesome, like we touched on earlier, is this kind of lore agnosticism. The fact that in your setting, no matter whether you're playing the Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or Eberron or any manner of homebrew campaigns, you can come up with whatever lore you want or no lore at all. And the monstrosities all just seem to work. Roger Twy mentioned, I think is it the Jakuli? I might be wrong with Jakuli. From Tomb of Annihilation, a jaguar that just has a bunch of snakes that come out of its shoulder, come out of its like back and shoulders. And it's just,
I don't know that one.
It's just a scary jaguar snake monster, and it's like,
yeah,
if that jumps out at your players in the middle of a jungle, no one's gonna ask, "Oh, where did this come from?" They're gonna be like, "Oh my god, a jungle monster," and battle it. And maybe after they'll wonder where it came. But it's the kind of thing that most monstrosities, I don't know what it is about them, but there's a similar enough facet of them to existing creatures, or to like real life creatures, that they get a pass when players see them and hear about them. They get oh yeah, that makes sense. I believe that this passes my suspension of disbelief. This works for me. Rust monsters, exactly. Another creature I mentioned earlier. They're creatures, little tiny little insect guys with these cool little antennas. I love them. They scuttle around and they eat iron. They eat iron, turn it into rust. And the thing about those that's so great is they make sense. And a lot of these monstrosities have that, where it's just, in their environment, which in the Rust Monsters case, underground in dwarven tunnels and things, they make sense there. It runs around, it eats rust from the veins of iron in the walls. Cool. That checks out. Like, yeah, it's just cool. Most of them have that kind of vibe to them. They have that passing kind of feel.
And I think that monstrosities get a little bit of extra leeway because of how like fun to fight they are, and how much when players see monstrosities, they're like, "Oh, exciting battle time." I feel like there's a little bit of extra leeway and suspension of disbelief of what a monster is doing in a location that players just kind of give you because they're blinded by the thought of bringing that body back and getting a bunch of bounty reward for it, or looting whatever's in its little hoard that it has at the back of the cave. Or I think that it's just so inherent and important to Dungeons and Dragons in slaying monsters and that kind of combat aspect that they just get that extra just, we can kind of fudge around the edges a little bit on these guys.
Yeah, and like Pete said earlier, for the vast majority, you don't have to ask questions about where it came from. A Hydra's attacking the gates of the town that just came out of the forest. All right, maybe someone drove it out of the forest, but you're never going to get any questions out of. You're not going to get any answers out of the Hydra. A demon is rampaging through town. Well, there's someone who summoned the demon, right?
Yep.
And maybe you can get information out of that demon. Like, there's a very large difference between the two there. So we've talked a little bit about why they're so great, and we hope that now you're thinking why. Wow, monstrosities are great. Let me use them.
They're incredible.
They're the best. Pete, let's talk about actually getting down to the brass tacks here, using monstrosities in our games and in your game. We've talked about a whole lot so far, but let's really bring it down to the three major places that we're going to see monstrosities in either a one-shot or a long-term campaign setting. What's our first?
All right.
Or probably most common.
So I think monstrosities are perfect choices if you're just looking for a random encounter. If your players are questing from one place to another, and they're moving through some kind of hazardous terrain, there's a monstrosity that you can find in the manual that will feel appropriate to that terrain that you can throw at them and just kind of, give that sense of danger. So they're perfect for that. Like I said, anything that you think of, you'll find a monstrosity that's right. Let's say you're going through the far northern mountain range. You can grab a Yeti. And the minute they see it, they're going to go, oh, that's a Yeti. This is the abominable snowman. This is the thing that lives up here. We understand that. We need to either run away or battle it, but that's just an incident one-to-one connection. If you're roaming the open plains, a slightly less well-known one, but perhaps they encounter a boulette, which is just this land shark that kind of like tunnels just slightly below the surface of the ground, trying to chase around and eat. I believe in the lore, which I kind of like, its favorite meal is just halflings. It just really likes eating halflings and chasing after them. But I think it'll eat just about anything. So if they're going through this big open space, maybe that's the right one for this. Maybe that's the right one for that particular game. But yeah, there's a monster for every just kind of part of the map that you're on.
Yeah, before we dive past this, Pete, what are some of your favorite random encounters with monstrosities? I know I've got a couple to throw out there.
Favorite random encounters. There's one that I was going to do at the end for one of my just favorite monstrosities, which I guess I can say now is...
We'll just wait till then, and we'll just start rolling through them all then.
Okay, yeah.
So our next major scenario situation you're going to notice monstrosities is, well, in a dungeon. Any monstrosity can fit into a dungeon. It really doesn't matter what it is. One of the greatest things about monstrosities, whether it be a Hydra or a Manticore or a Boulette or literally any big creature you can think of, you can just toss it into a dungeon and say, yeah, it's chained up there. Ta-da! Yep. The cultists that you were fighting captured the monstrosity. There's no worry.
They've trained
of,
it to protect the dungeon.
Yeah, exactly. There's no worry of like alignment and like, well, this creature wouldn't work with devils because it's lawful good. It just fights, and it's like a cornered animal will fight to defend itself if it feels threatened. And yeah, maybe there are even more malevolent reasons. Maybe you are in an abandoned mine shaft and there is an ettercap, a weird giant humanoid kind of hybrid that's breeding a nest of spiders. I said giant, I think. I meant spider humanoid. And maybe you're investigating the lab of some manic spellcaster or some horrible cultist. And it's part of their experiments that these monstrosities are being created in the first place. There's any number of ways you can tie monstrosities into dungeons. Hell, maybe the monstrosity is the one who owns the dungeon, which kind of ties into the final big way that you can tie in monstrosities. And that is...
They're great quests. Yeah. Their monstrosities make perfect quests. There is a insert monstrosity here terrifying the small rural village of Pleasantshire. Go and kill it. It is pretty much the quintessential Dungeons and Dragons quest, going after a monstrosity. And that doesn't even make it without its own nuances, because you can really, especially with some of the more intelligent monstrosities, you can really start to kind of weave a web. I think a great example of a monstrosity that's perfect for this is the Medusa, which is one of the ones I wanted to talk about a little bit later. But yeah, a lot of the more intelligent monstrosities, they can have, entire layers with other smaller monstrosities that they have kind of at their whim. And, just go kill a thing, get gold, come back. I mean, that's the quintessential D&D right there.
And thank you, Proficiency Bonus, for following. We appreciate your support.
Oh, thank you.
Y'all
That's a good name.
Goes a long way. Yeah, it's a very good name.
Solid name.
Your follows go a long way to really help us. So if any of you guys are watching and haven't followed yet, it's the heart symbol for you.
Flannel Pug opens.
If you subscribe or follow.
Yes. I was going to say, Flannel Pug opens chest. It's a Yeti inside of a mimic. Perfect dungeon. I mean, You're not wrong. You could do that, and I promise you your players would love it.
It's really interesting because Ingram's mentioning another example, right? Where, like in Star Wars, where the monstrosity is the cave. You can run entire encounters, especially with some of the larger monstrosities, where the dungeon is the monstrosity. Maybe there is a purple worm so large and so massive that the players actually need to go inside of it and go exploring to recover someone who's been lost. Maybe
I know that I have done that with the Tarrasque before.
The Tarrasque. I mean, really cool. The giant mimic. The house is the mimic. There are a bunch of really cool ways to really twist that. And it's even cooler, right, when you're talking about some of the more intelligent monstrosities too, like the Kraken. Is a creature. I mean, what's the int bonus on a Kraken? It's got to be like 24?
It's I think 4. Yeah, that sounds right.
Incredibly high.
The Kraken.
Smarter than mortal man can be.
When we were talking about monsters from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes on Talks recently, and we were talking about Froz Blue, we're saying this monster isn't a monster, it's a campaign. I feel the same way about the Kraken. The Kraken is an entire campaign. It is old beyond reckoning. I absolutely love Krakens. They're one of my all-time favorite monsters. I've never used them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? That's part of the trouble with using monstrosities of that kind of level, especially the very intelligent ones like the Sphinx or the Kraken, is there's an obligation that you feel to do it right, that you can be afraid to use. And honestly, what it comes down to is don't ever be afraid to use a monster in your game. If you don't do it great, whatever. If everyone you're playing with has fun, then you did it fine. And you can criticize your own DMing all you want, but it's just stuff to learn from. And there's no need to be upset about doing it wrong. I've played a bunch of monsters, I think, badly, but people have had a lot of fun playing them or playing against them. So, yeah. Anyway, let's jump on to kind of setting the scene here. We seem to be moving in the direction of these big boys, these specific monsters. So let's talk about how you can introduce them.
Yeah. How do you make a monster kind of feel exciting and kind of build up the drama before they arrive? Because we've kind of covered, like, battle, it's just fun. The battle's already done for you. You fight a big monster, and it's awesome because the monster's cool. But how do you kind of make it feel like it's part of the world? And I think it's actually something that's pretty easy to do, and just a little bit of like nuance here and there that you can throw into your games that will really just make it pop and make it come out. And that is just having the world show what the monster has done to the world by existing. So as a baseline example, let's say you go into a town and the town's been having trouble with some kind of monster. This is this is like a really kind of base level thing, but you don't need to have, and I think it can break immersion in some cases, where if you just kind of run up to a monstrosity or run up to a village and the villagers come up to you and say, there's a hydra that's been attacking our town. And I think it's a lot more interesting if they see that the town is struggling and start to inquire about it and then kind of learn that they have this threat. An example that I wrote here was that maybe they go into the barn to buy horses and all of the animals are like caged and set aside in pens in close quarters. And the druid thinks, oh, why are you being so cruel? Why are you treating these animals so poorly? No, we're not treating them poorly. We're protecting them from the outside threats.
Yeah, like the griffin that will fly down and take the horses away. You know,
oh, yeah.
Like that is an awesome way to kind of introduce griffins have been plaguing the town. Another really great example, right, is you're in a mountaintop village, right? It's snowy, it's icy, and firewood is extremely scarce. And yet every night the villagers take a torch and just light it and burn it directly outside of their homes, just out in the weather. And you're thinking, why are they so wasteful with that? They're offering to trade me incredibly valuable things for my stupid adventuring torches that I've had since I was level 1.
That's a cool one. That's a really cool one, Jeremy.
The answer is they're driving off the Yetis. And that's just a really, I mean, I thought yours was really nice too. These are just really cool and interesting ways to tie them in. So let's talk about some of our favorite monsters. I want to talk about the Rust Monster.
Let's get in.
Do you mind?
No, get in there.
All right, Rust Monster. For those unfamiliar with the Rust Monster, he's a tiny little insect-like creature. It's only, I think it's classified as small in size, so it's about a small dog or a very large cat. And it has a bunch of kind of it's got a ribbed scales on its back, almost like an armadillo. It's got a big kind of forked tail that kind of is like flappy. It's kind of hard to describe visually. And it's got 2 big antennas in the front. It scuttles around and it eats iron. And this monster is great for a lot of reasons. One, I personally think it's really cute.
Yeah, someone else said that earlier too.
Rust monsters are really cute. So like that's one thing I love about them. Secondly, they're absolutely 100% objectively non-malevolent. Rust monsters will never attack a player. They'll always attack their armor or their weapons because they want to eat them. And then the players will attack the monsters, and then the monsters fight back. But when the Rust monster kind of comes up to you curiously, he's not like, oh, let me murder this adventurer. No, the Rust monster's like, oh, look, this big metal, I want to eat it. And I like to think of it kind of like dumb animal think, right? Like if you're holding, you wake up in the morning and your cat meows at you, and you're just looking at me like, okay, you just want food, and the cat's just yelling, feed me. That's what the Rust monster is. He's coming over and he's like, ooh, yum. And then the adventurers start hitting him with swords. You know, and I love
monsters.
Yeah, exactly.
I always picture Rust monsters as sounding kind of like, that's kind of the noise I always imagine a Rust monster makes.
Oh boy, your Rust monsters are weird.
Yeah, my Rust monsters are always kind of like, that's almost exactly what I've always done for them.
See, I imagine them more like kind of like that.
Hey, that's a pretty good Rust monster, Jeremy.
Yeah, they're more cute, I think, than your weird groans. But,
yeah, I mean, mine are a little bit more alien.
Yeah, but anyway, Rust monsters are just really cool. I super dig them, and they actually also make great trained creatures. if you want to use rust monsters in your game, they make great random encounters. They also make great allies for Underdark creatures. Say their party's fighting a bunch of Durgar. They're infiltrating the Durgar fortress. They're trying to get to the Durgar queen, who is like ruling over them. But the Durgar queen has a cadre of guards, and those guards have a bunch of rust monsters. And the rust monsters
and wooden
are
weapons.
trained. Well, no, not even. The rust monsters are trained to only attack who the Durgar command or point to, basically. And this is now an awesome situation where your players at this point might be level 10. They might be like a pretty high level party. And rust monsters are a tiny little, they're like CR 1/2 or something.
Oh, yeah.
They're very weak. But because they can destroy armor, they're still terrifying even at higher levels.
That was the thing I was going to say.
That's, I think, part of what makes them so great is they're always scary, and they're cool things for you to use as both random encounters and as more interesting, kind of like guard dogs. And that fits the flavor really well of the Underdark too. You know, like
they're good.
Yeah, they don't have like wolves. No, they have rust monsters.
They got rust monsters.
Let's jump on to the next creature, Pete. I know you put this one on here.
Yeah, I love this one, and it's a real classic. Yeah, I mean, everyone loves the Medusa is one that I really wanted to talk about. And one of the great things about the Medusa is that when I said that, we just mentioned before, all of you instantly know exactly what I'm talking about. And on the off chance that you don't, what a Medusa is a humanoid kind of bipedal with, instead of hair, they have snakes, and a Medusa's gaze, when they look at you, can turn you into stone. They are generally kind of pictured as female, but I don't think that's actually necessarily has to be true about Medusas. It can be whatever you want.
Have male Medusa.
Yep. And that's what the Medusa is. The one, before I get into what I love about Medusas, I will say that the one thing I don't like about Medusas in 5e is that they're called Medusas and not Gorgons. Absolutely tears me apart, because Medusa was a proper noun in mythology, but that's aside the point. The Medusa is that. So one of the things that I really love about Medusas, aside from just the recognizability and how players will react to them, because they know what a Medusa is, they will plan and prepare for a battle with a Medusa if they know they're going to fight a Medusa more than almost any other foe. They'll think to themselves, well, we know we can't look at this creature, so we have to have some way to kind of shield our eyes. Maybe we'll go into the fight with blindfolds on and just go by sound. Maybe we'll have some other kind of lens through which we can observe the Medusa without looking directly and kind of succumbing to the stare, or maybe we'll try and fight from a distance. Whatever it is, they're going to be thinking going into the fight if they know that they're in this battle. If they've ever read the legend of Perseus and Medusa, or they're familiar with that, maybe they'll start thinking, oh, we'll bring a mirror and try and turn the terrifying gaze back upon the Medusa like the myth of legend. So it just adds all sorts of just interesting dynamics into a fight from a beginning, from a tactical standpoint.
Yeah, and I mean, even more so there, just to add to that, one of the great things about a Medusa is if they know the players are coming, they can prep back. Medusas are intelligent creatures. In a lot of cases, the whole becoming a Medusa is brought upon by a curse. You can decide, yes, my person was cursed. That's why they look like this. That's why the villain is this way. The whole environment and layer of a Medusa being littered with the statues of its victims is just awesome. And really
there are
cool and dramatic. Go ahead.
I was gonna say there's so many cool things that you can do with the kind of the statue element. For example, the last time I ran a Medusa in my game, the Medusa was an upright citizen and a renowned sculptor in town, a renowned blind sculptor. And basically, they would just kind of lure in adventurer models, and just these people from out of town, drifters through, lure them in and make them statues and then display them in the gallery. And no one would ask questions because they were out of towners, which is just a really, in my opinion, was just a really interesting way to frame it. And there's just so much you can do with it, because the core thing about the Medusa was that it was the kind of petrification. And I think the only thing I changed about that Medusa was the final pug. Medusa cast disguise self. That was the only thing I gave the Medusa, was the ability to cast disguise self. Yep.
And that is terrifying. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I just love about the Medusa, is just that it is an intelligent foe, and you can play it like that. It can have traps, it can have backup plans, it can have a entire legion of lesser creatures that it has intimidated into its service. Perhaps a small army of Darrow, crazy Underdark gnomes that it has forced into servitude out of fear of becoming petrified themselves. Perhaps Durgar are another great example. But yeah, it's one of the reasons I absolutely love the Medusa, and I think it is an absolute classic monster. And maybe, maybe there's a redemption story in there for Medusa. There's not often for Monstrosities, but maybe.
I was going to say, Psychopath 23, it says, has anyone tried talking to her, sitting her down and telling her turning people to stone is not okay? I think most of those people are now statues of people sitting in chairs. But maybe someday, maybe your adventures are the one.
Oh, beautiful.
So Jeremy, you want to talk about your next foe?
Yeah, my next monstrosity. I absolutely love the Hydra. Oh my god, who
they're all
doesn't
good,
love Hydras? Hydra's an interesting creature because first, it's a mythological creature. When you think of Hydra, you think of basically a large wingless dragon with a whole bunch of necks and heads, which is horrifying, at least in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, no good.
I generally associate Hydras with kind of swampy conditions, but you can find them in caves or lakes or pretty much wherever you want to put them. Yeah, the jungle is very common, but I really like one of my favorite kind of random encounter situations. I don't really use truly random encounters, but one of my favorite environmental encounters is what I'll say is the Hydra in the swamp, where it's just got the head kind of poking up out of the water, just a little bit watching you, right? Like waiting like an alligator for you to approach before springing up on you and just going to town. And I don't know, it's a very dramatic way to kind of start off an encounter. It definitely starts off with a bang. Now, Hydras are also interesting because they got some tactics that go behind them in a very interesting way. If you go to cut off a Hydra's head, 2 heads grow back, which bad thing for you because then there's twice as many Hydra heads biting.
And it's harder to battle.
A Hydra that a player is not expecting to fight can easily become an incredibly dangerous encounter. Players may not be prepared with the right types of weapons to fight it because you need the right types of weapons. A lot of creatures, especially high-level monsters, you just say, oh, I have a magic weapon. It's all good. That's not the case for Hydra. You need very specific things. And I'm not going to talk too much about it, but personally, I love the extra tactics that go into battling with Hydras and really makes the players think about things a little more and feel like it's a scary freaking battle.
And one of my favorite things about Hydras, just from a DM perspective, is that I feel that they have some of the most flexibility for any monster in terms of difficulty, because you can just add and subtract heads. It's just a sliding scale. How scary is this Hydra? How many heads does this Hydra start out with? I think an underrated, just as one last note, I think an underrated number of heads is 1, because then they don't even know that they're fighting a Hydra until they guaranteed chop off that first head and get 2 more back. And then because a lot of the times I feel like the Hydra doesn't end up sprouting a lot of new heads in battle because people kind of have a general idea of the tactics, but that first one will definitely catch them off guard.
It's another example of, I mentioned it with the Rust Monster, we mentioned it with the Mimic. For players who are new to D&D, who haven't really experienced they haven't run the gamut yet, playing against these creatures for the first time, and maybe not even new to D&D, maybe just new to 5e, or just not super well versed. They haven't gone through the monster manual and read every creature. coming up against these creatures for the first time is an awesome. It's just really cool.
Quick sidetrack, Jeremy. What's
Please.
your favorite one of those experiences that you've had? The first time you've been up against a monster and thought it was radical just because you like hadn't done it before.
That I have been up against a monster?
Yeah, what's your favorite one that you've had sprung on you that you weren't quite familiar with and you just thought it was really cool?
Oh, geez.
I can do one first.
No.
If you
it's been a long time since I've run up against a monster I didn't actually really recognize, but I know one fairly recently that I can put out there. It was I was playing in a campaign that recently kind of went on a hiatus because we're going to be starting up the Curse of Strahd, which I'm very excited to play in. But in that campaign, we went through a cave and heading down to the darkness into the kind of a shadow fae-like area, and we just kind of hear sobbing ahead of us and get a little concerned and sneak up. We know there were people that were lost in this cave fairly recently that we're actually trying to track down. And as we turn the corner, we see someone over in the corner kind of hunched over, sobbing. And as they turn around, it is the Lonely. A monstrosity, actually, from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. And my favorite thing about that is like, all right, well, it's like 50 feet away from us. We're good. And then it stabs its arm 50 feet through, just across the map into my character's chest and pulls me across the battle map to it. And it was just, oh my God!
That's a really good one.
It was amazing. I ended up spending most of that encounter hiding underneath a dead body, pretending to be dead. But I digress. It's always excellent when you get surprised by one of those like, oh, kind of abilities. If you don't know what the Lonely is, look up the picture for the Lonely. You won't regret it. Oh, you will, actually.
If my own personal, or do. It's up to you. Follow your heart. But I was going to say my own personal one was the, I think it's actually a monstrosity. It is the death dog. When you put us up against death dogs a long time ago, I'd never heard of that at all. And it was just this two-headed dog, which is creepy. But then it bit into me and I felt that disease thing start to happen. I was like, oh God, what is this? I'm inevitably going to die. This is the end of my character forever. And then there's a paladin, so everything was fine. But it was some of the most... Moment. It was, yeah, in that moment, this idea is when it first ticked down my hit points, it was fine. When an hour later, when we were walking away from it, my hit points were still ticking down. I was like, this is it. And that was that kind of, it was a bit delayed, but it was a real moment of dread that I experienced.
Death Dog is another monstrosity, by the way.
Indeed.
And it's actually interesting because that encounter Pete's talking about right now that left such a visceral memory in his mind, random encounter.
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, I think even at the time I could tell it was a random encounter. It still scared me.
Yep. And those kind of moments, right, that you remember in like a wow, that was tense, but it was also awesome kind of way. That's what I live for. Is the end.
Oh yeah.
Is my players having those moments of extreme tension, and then prevailing. Or being dissolved by...
Or you died.
You know what happens. But
Bionic
anyway.
Shiva mentioned the troll, the number of times we cut off its limbs. Just, yeah, exactly. That kind of stuff is great.
But yeah, let's talk about the next monster. I mentioned it briefly earlier, but Pete, this guy was yours, and that's the Ettercap.
Yes. I love the Ettercap.
I'm not super familiar with the Ettercap.
Yeah, I think it's an underrated one. And that's why I wanted to give it some light. And it is, for one thing, I think it fits kind of the balance between the wild and kind of just nature perverted side of things and the more kind of like sentient controlling things. It's right on the line. It's got an int of, I think, about 8 or so. And you can tell that it has a will and it feels malevolent. But it's also not like, it's not a schemer. And what it is it's much like a shepherd, but for spiders. It's this strange kind of humanoid... Yeah, it's kind of like this strange humanoid spider. It walks around on 2 legs, but it can also spin webs and create webs. So it's somewhere in between. Did we not say Ettercap?
No, we just need to spell it.
Oh, yes.
Oh, good.
No worries. So yeah, it's just this strange sort of humanoid spider, and it creates webs. And what it does is it breeds spiders. It has a piece of lore where it hates Fae, but you don't got to use that. The point is they live in the Underdark, or they live in like really gloomy and dark forests, and they just tame spiders and then have them do stuff. And I like the Ettercap for a couple of reasons. One, it creates an awesome aesthetic where the Ettercap, before you fight it, you know that you're going to be doing something with spiders. You don't understand there's an Ettercap, but you're going to start seeing webs in its domain, and you can tell that you're walking somewhere dangerous. Maybe they're kind of roped between the trees. Maybe the first few kind of miles that you're walking through this twisted forest, you see kind of thick and intricate webbing systems. You see a few kind of like smaller spiders that are creeping on them and getting close to you, but nothing that's going in. So you're kind of you're a little bit nervous as you're walking through, and then you see hanging in the forest the body of a bear that's been like entangled and ensnared in webs. And then you have the idea, and then you get attacked by giant spiders, and then you realize that the giant spiders are using tactics because there's a strange spider voice in the distance that's kind of like clicking and directing them from different places. And that's what I love about the Ettercap, is just this idea that it's a spider general, and that's all it is.
I almost like the idea more with the Ettercap, right? Exactly what you were saying. But one of the things that I've seen a few times is people having really intelligent Ettercap, having like
that's also rad.
Casting Ettercap. And even if not, that Ettercap doesn't want you to fight the giant spiders. The Ettercap is smart enough to know that you're a threat. Maybe it wants to eat you. Maybe it wants you to feed you to the spiders, but maybe it just wants you to leave. Maybe it hangs that bear up in the forest to try and scare you away. Like, I love coming at it from that other perspective, right? Where it's a shepherd and you're the wolf coming after its flock. And it's just trying to send you away, but you don't go away.
And also just one last thing from the from the Ettercap stat block. There's a variant Ettercap, which I always recommend using, called the web garrote. It's an ability it can use where it takes its web and then, like a garrote wire, sneaks up behind you and tries to strangle you to death with web, which is absolutely radical and metal as fuck. So that's it. That's all I have to say about the Ettercap web garrote. But use that if you run one.
Yeah, and our last creature, we don't have a ton of time to chat about him, but you've all heard about it, I hope. The Sphinx. Yes. It is a creature that has been spoken of in human history for 5,000 years at least. It is ancient as all fuck. And odds are, if you run into a Sphinx in your game, it's also ancient as all fuck. One of the things that's awesome about Sphinxes, they are super smart. But they're also super, like,
mysterious.
Yeah, like they have this mystique to them that is just, it's a lot of fun to engage in. You can have a Sphinx be this almost prophetess kind of character that can see the future, some sort of seer. You can have this Sphinx be a creature that can uniquely control time and space around it. The Gynosphinx and Androsphinx, respectively. And obviously, we're having it in chat. The Funnel Pug, I have a riddle for you.
I love riddles, and for that reason, I have to love Sphinxes because I love riddles, and that's the best way to convey riddles. Is because that's the great thing about Sphinxes is when players see them, they know like, oh, I better get my riddle solving pants on. Like, that's it. That's all I had to say about that.
Yeah.
Also, they're not evil, which is nice.
Yeah, one of the things that's cool about those, right? The players see the big ancient temple that's like crumbling to dust, and they go in to explore it, and they're braced. They're going real quiet. They're looking for, traps. They're being stealthy and careful, and they're just not being attacked. And they're not running into any traps. And they make their way through the entire dungeon to like the throne room of this ancient temple. and they open the doors, and there's just sand littering the floor, and this massive Sphinx creature awaiting them. And,
I wish I had a cool enough voice to do justice to what a Sphinx probably would sound like.
Yeah, I mean, you can do whatever you want, right? It can be, I have long awaited your arrival, or whatever. Like, you can do all sorts of cool stuff with this as a plot device, or as really any manner of. One of the things I really love, right? Because Sphinxes aren't evil creatures intrinsically. You can make an evil Sphinx, and I think that is terrifying, right?
Yeah, I actually don't think I've ever seen that. That's an interesting idea.
So you can make an evil Sphinx. They're by default lawful neutral. But one of the things that's really interesting about fighting a Sphinx, maybe it will fight you simply because you screwed up its riddle. Maybe you have to murder the Sphinx to steal a magic item that it has. Like, in which case your characters are doing something that is morally very ambiguous. And these kind of characters are really, really interesting. Perhaps the Sphinx is out to stop you because it has foreseen some future involving your characters as a party that it cannot allow to come to fruition.
That sounds rad.
Sphinxes make excellent
just sounds good.
Yeah. But anyway, that's really about it. I mean, we can run any of these creatures in any different ways. There are so many other, I mean, there were at least another 5 monstrosities I really wanted to talk about. But that's fine. You'll see us use them in our games from time to time.
Hey.
As long as you keep watching DnDTime.
Hey, and that's going to wrap us up. Thank you so much to everyone who watched. A second shout out to Proficiency Bonus. I remember your name because you had a rad name. Thank you very much for following. Was there anyone else that followed?
No, I believe that was it today. Cool. I see everyone who's watching either is already following or hates us, but
anyway, yes, thank you all very much. We love you. We appreciate you tuning in and hanging out and talking about some D&D stuff. Tune in on Friday for Pete and Jeremy's D&D Time. It's a show that we run where we run one-shots. Odds are you're already aware of that, but if you're not, come check it out. It starts at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 Pacific. And that's pretty much it.
I'm real excited for my adventure on Friday. That's my announcement.
Announcements. DnDTime Talks. If you tune in, we are considering some scheduling changes coming up sometime in the future. We're not entirely sure when we're going to roll those out and when the ship's going to be happening. But we recently did a survey and received a lot of great feedback on, kind of what your thought on some of our new shows are, just where you stand on the various shows. And one of the things was that people were really into brews, and so we want to do brews more. So we are planning on moving brews at some point. Again, we're not sure when and exactly how this is going to happen, but we're going to be moving brews to Wednesdays during this time slot, and then talks to perhaps one of those Sunday time slots. We're not exactly sure how talks is going to get moved around and fit into it all, but if you tune into talks, and for example, if you really love talks and you cannot watch it ever on Sundays, let us know that, and let us know what you think about that potential change coming up. But just want to keep you informed, and we'll have more news about that once we have a better idea of where we're at.
Yeah, and the best way to reach us about that is just starting a conversation in the Discord server. Just start typing along in the Hangouts and let us know, hey, I think that's a great idea, moving talks to Wednesday, or whatever.
What are you doing?
Yeah, or no, Pete and Jeremy, you're ruining D&D time forever. But anywho, actually, I just saw a really awesome comment in the chat I cannot skip. The forgotten one, monster submissions. Need to add that into feedback. Oh, that would be a really fun brews next time we do it, right?
Yeah,
people
for sure.
Like either voting on the names for monsters and then we brew them up, or maybe monster submissions would be cool. Oh, that would require a bit of prep though, because I got to get my balance spreadsheet up to date.
Yeah.
So I get to show off my maybe.
Nothing Jeremy loves more than you'd be surprised at how much Jeremy is not joking about making good spreadsheets and how much he enjoys it. But anyway, thanks again for tuning in. I think that's an awesome idea. Maybe next time we do brews, we can do some monsters. That might be cool. And I'm Pete.
And I'm Jeremy. And
this is
DnDTime
DnDTime Talks. Goodbye.